Bob McKenzie has just now released his final NHL Draft Rankings. And if you guys don't know, Bob McKenzie surveys NHL scouts to put his rankings together, which means that whatever Bob says is pretty likely to happen on draft day. But that just begs the question, what does Bob McKenzie's newest draft rankings look like, and how could they influence the order of this NHL draft? Well, make sure you watch till the end as we go through all the picks with all the analysis and prospect talk, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this as we lead up to the draft in just a couple of days. And here it is, via TSN Hockey, the 80 players plus 20 honorable mentions that Bob McKenzie lists in the 2025 NHL Draft. And I'm always so excited for this time of year because Bob McKenzie's list always gives us a great idea of what could happen on draft day, which prospects are viewed as better compared to each other, and how especially the top 10 could end up falling. Getting into the final ranking, it is no surprise to see Matthew Schaefer land himself at the first overall position. It seems like the Islanders are pretty much confirmed to be taking Schaefer number 1, and we'll just have to see how the rest of the draft ends up playing out. But Schaefer, at this point, seems like a pretty big lock, and this ranking pretty much confirms that. Now, getting into the article side of things, 10 out of 10 NHL scouts put Matthew Schaefer at their number 1 spot. Some of them saying that he could be as good as Scott Niedermayer, while others saying the gap might not be as big. One scout saying it's a 51 to 49 type of thing, comparing Matthew Schaefer and Michael Misa. And that's also not much of a surprise. We have heard some rumors recently of San Jose maybe taking Frondell, but I personally think that's just smoke and mirrors. There was one scout out of the 10 that didn't have Michael Misa at number 2, which that scout ended up having him at number 4 on their rankings. But at the same time, it seems like overwhelmingly Michael Misa is the favorite number 2. And in Anton Frondell's case, he's not even ranked 3rd on this list. Interestingly, the rest of the top 3 goes Porter Martone 3, Anton Frondell 4, and then Caleb Denoye at number 5. And I was fully expecting Anton Frondell to be coming in at number 3, for a player like Martone potentially being behind Frondell, Denoye, maybe even Jake O'Brien perhaps. But we see Martone come in at the 3rd overall spot, which I think is pretty fair for him, but I really wasn't expecting that because I felt like Martone might have slipped a little bit, and there is of course the possibility that he still ends up slipping in the NHL draft when we actually get to the teams making their decisions. They might want to go for a center instead, but I think Martone is still a top 5 talent for sure, and I think deserves to be at this spot. Definitely a solid place to be at, but again, higher up than I would have expected, but good for them. Then we go into the rest of the top 10, which also has some pretty interesting surprises. You have Caleb Denoye at number 5 behind Frondell. I honestly would have expected it to be Frondell 3, Caleb Denoye at number 4, but we'll get into the other players here in a second. You got Jake O'Brien behind them at number 6, then James Hagens at number 7, Brady Martin at number 8, then Roger McQueen at 9, and then rounding it out is Victor Eklund at number 10. I was kind of surprised to see Eklund still in the top 10, but that's another one that I'm really happy to see. Of course, in the top 10, there's a couple picks I'm a little bit iffy about. James Hagens dropping number 7, even though he really hasn't done much to deserve that in my opinion, is a little bit iffy, but I get it. I understand the momentum with some of the other centers in this class. You got to play like Roger McQueen at number 9, which I think is a pretty realistic range for him to be at when it's all said and done in the draft. There's some teams that I could see really wanting him if they even had a top 5 pick. Others, I don't think would touch him within a 10-foot pole inside the top 15, so I think the variance is going to be pretty huge here. But all in all, nothing that's all too surprising. I kind of expected Victor Eklund to be outside the top 10. He's something that I mostly mocked to Detroit at 13th overall, but I still think has such a projectable game, even if he's not the biggest player in the world, and has so much skill, especially in tight, in those physical situations, that I think would really translate well to the NHL level. So I'm glad to see him still up this high, and glad to see he's still getting some respect and not forgotten amidst all of the centers in this class. Now let's talk about that 11 through 20 range, because there's some fascinating picks here as well. First, I mean, starting things out, Randy Murka at number 11. I was kind of expecting him to be a little bit higher inside that top 10, replacing maybe the spot that Victor Eklund is in perhaps, but I don't think it's going to affect too much since I still think a team like Seattle is going to be really in on him. And even if he does end up dropping, I think a team like Buffalo is going to be really in on him. I think a team like Anaheim directly after would also be in on him as well. So I think there's a very little chance that Murka's available outside that 8 to 10 range. So I wouldn't put too much thought into this personally. But then maybe a more fascinating one is the next 2 picks, because you got Jackson Smith at number 12 and then Sean Aitchison at number 13. And you guys know how I feel about Jackson Smith, at least recently. He's something that I kind of I fell in love with at the start of the year, and then kind of fell out of love with a little bit over the last few months. Something that I really like, the creativity and the ability to connect on passes, but there are some decisions that I often feel are just too frustrating to warrant a great NHL future, more so just a solid one. It's interesting to see him above a player like Sean Aitchison, who's also gotten a lot of hype over the second half of this season, has had some big goals as well, some big physicality. I think, again, most likely a player like Aitchison is taken before Jackson Smith, but I think Smith is a lot higher than I was expecting, so he could go a lot higher than maybe inside the top 15 instead. I was kind of predicting around that St. Louis Calgary range of the draft, but now top 15 seems a lot more likely. Also, love to see Logan Hensler and Justin Carbonneau, really the two guys most popular in terms of picking to the Montreal Canadiens to 16 and 17, at number 15 and number 16, and I still expect it to be Carbonneau 16 and then Logan Hensler at 17, though I wouldn't be surprised if Carbonneau is selected a little bit higher than that. I could see a team like Detroit potentially really being in on him, so I wouldn't bet on that nearly as much, though Hensler I feel like is a much more likely option to be available at 16 and 17. And we got to talk about it too, even though he's a player I really don't like in this range, he's somebody that has been rising quite a bit, and that is Jack Nesbitt of the Windsor Spitfires. To me, very physical, and I think puts himself in the right positions pretty consistently. I just don't think has much premium talents. The skating speed isn't quite there. The intensity is a little bit lacking for a player that's really pegged as this bruiser on the ice. I think he's kind of just more of a milquetoast Brady Martin, who I already have a little bit of questions when it comes to the skill level translating to the NHL. So a top 20 pick I think is pretty laughable. I would not do that in any scenario. But again, in this draft, you're looking for projectability and a sea of question marks, and Nesbitt I think projects well as a bottom line forward. Not much more than that though, personally. And then after that, we get the wave of WHLers in Braden Coots, Cole Reshny, and Lynn Lakovic. I am also a little bit surprised, but in a good way, to see Cole Reshny up at number 19. He's something that I absolutely adore, how feisty he is out there on top of the skill level that he presents. Sure, there is some question marks about skating, but I think he's quick enough with his decisions to be able to combat that long term. And to see him inside the top 20, I mean, for a smaller forward like that in this year's draft, when you have a player like Jack Nesbitt at 6'4", rising like he has, I'll take that. But Linda Lakovic, I think, is the big story going at number 20. Somebody that I think in terms of the skill level is probably a top 10 pick in this year's draft, but I think a lot of teams have question marks over how much the intensity is really there, how much he's actually using his body on a shift-to-shift basis, which isn't really all that much, even though he has a big size level at 6'4". I think this is more so the range that I have in my rankings and have him in the draft order, but it's a little bit jarring to see him still at this placement because it's a lot lower than what I would have even expected a couple months back. And getting through the rest of the top 32, I will say I was pleasantly surprised as well to see Colin Potter at 21. Still not as high as I would have him, but I was kind of just a doomer when it came to Colin Potter. I was kind of expecting to be a second round pick, and yes, that is still a possibility, but I think now with him ranked carefully inside the top 25, he'll be a first round pick, which thank goodness, man. I was also curious about the next two defensemen on the list, with Sasha Boumediene at 23 and then Cameron Reid at 24. I mean, Boumediene is fine. I think he has a lot of talent and a lot of skill that he can unlock, but has some problems with the decision-making and his actual implementation of that skill in skating. But you have a player like Cameron Reid, who I think is just a much better product now, but it's an interesting question weighing the potential versus who they are at this level. I will say, though, if Boumediene is selected before Reid, I would be a little bit disappointed, but at this rate, it seems like that's what's going to happen. As for some more interesting names, you got Will Horkoff coming in at number 27. He's somebody that I've speculated for a little bit could be a first rounder, somebody that rose a ton as soon as he got to the NCAA with Michigan in the second half of this year, brings a lot of physicality in his game and careful hockey. He's somebody, though, that I like with the projectability, and I wouldn't be surprised to see as a first rounder, though pretty helpfully in the first round of this Bob list, I think could potentially touch inside the top 25. And in other notes, nothing's really too crazy outside of the Horkoff pick after this, but I did want to mention Harry Brustovitz coming in at number 32. He's something that has been rising quite a bit with London over the second half, of course, as London won the Memorial Cup this last year. He's something that I like quite a bit, a very projectable base to work on there. I've often predicted him to go to San Jose with that second pick in the first round, and to me, I think he's pretty much locked at that selection, unless somebody selects him earlier than that, which is a possibility. Now, moving on to the second round, there is quite a few fascinating selections here. First, you got Joshua Ravensbergen, who I was kind of expecting a little bit to be in the first round with how much we've heard teams like Philadelphia, Nashville, those teams that have multiple first-round picks could potentially draft a goaltender. I still fully expect Ravensbergen to be at the very least that 32nd overall selection by Philly, that last pick in the first round. It just makes too much sense at this point. It's most likely going to happen and is going to be a first-rounder. Not where I would select him, but at this point, it's all but a sure thing. I will note too, somebody that I liked quite a bit in my rankings, probably should have been a little bit higher looking back and watching some more film, and Alexander Zurovsky, somebody that is just an absolute burner out there, so much electricity in his game, so much speed. He's somebody that I've heard a lot, has been rising up a ton on draft boards recently. Because, of course, with all the Russian prospects that are over in Russia, just now starting to meet with NHL teams, so that is a big thing as well. I would not be surprised if Zurovsky could sneak into that late first round, but I think early second makes a lot of sense, especially for San Jose and their first pick in the second. I think that's a really realistic option. Now, a name that's a little bit lower in the 40s here that I am going to be fascinated to see where he goes on, I guess, day 2 of the draft most likely, is Simon Wang. As you guys can see, 42nd in Bob McKenzie's rankings. Somebody that, as a defenseman, is maybe one of the most raw prospects just in general in this draft class, counting everybody in the age group. It is astounding to see the skill, whereas the decision-making and the actual processing level still needs a long way to go. Still, though, with the skating and I think how much of a heads-up player he can be in the future, I think he's somebody that is worthy of a bet inside the first 2 rounds for sure. And again, with that size, with the skating ability to match, I mean, teams I think could be all over that. I could see a team like Utah potentially wanting to draft a defenseman like that all day, every day. So I wouldn't be surprised if he finds himself into the 30s when it's all said and done. Another name I also expect to be a little bit higher than where he is right now is Mason West. We talked about him a ton on this channel over the last couple of months. Something that I have adored watching when he especially went to the USHL in the second half of the season was, of course, a high school quarterback for his team in Minnesota and had to make a big choice between hockey or football. He chose hockey, now is committed to Michigan State University and will play there after this next season, which is basically the best development program you could possibly go to right now. So I think in West's case, especially with the size and how much skill there is with the puck on his stick, I would also be shocked if he's available outside the 30s. Number 49, a player I'm not surprised to see this high, and I honestly would not be shocked if he goes higher, is Jacob Rumbach. We've talked about him as well a little bit in terms of the underrated pieces in this class, but as a D for the Lincoln Stars this last year, 6'6", big size, but great skating to back it up, and as well, I think a decent transition ability. Nothing incredible, but for his size, I think he does pretty well at it. So he's something that I think, especially with the D options, pretty limited in this class, especially on the bigger side of things that can play a sturdy defensive game. I think Rumbach's going to get selected pretty high too, and I would not be surprised if he's one of the first picks in the second round to start out. Now, an interesting note here as well in the 50s is back-to-back-to-back Russian goaltenders in Semyon Frolov, Pyotr Andrianov, and Alexei Medvedev. And this is going to be interesting because we just heard recently, we talked about all these goaltenders in my rankings, but just recently, Pyotr Andrianov was confirmed to sign a 3-year extension to take him to 2030. He already had an extension in place in the KHL, but this next extension would keep him in Russia until 2030. I would not be surprised to see that really affect Andrianov's stock, even though I don't think it should. How many goaltenders are in the NHL and are already immediately great by the time they're 23 years old? It's pretty rare to see goalies immediately step in like that, and I would be willing to wait for a player like Andrianov. Even though I prefer Medvedev, Andrianov is still a great goaltender, and I think is worthy of a top 2 pick. But because of that contract extension, don't be surprised if he really does end up slipping. Now, my last note here in terms of the players that got ranked on the list is John Mooney, the last player ranked on the list at number 80. This is going to be a fascinating player to watch on draft day because you know what he's capable of with the skill, and he even has some decent physical attributes to him at 5'7", but my goodness, is a absolute boomer bust prospect. The size is a massive factor. You're going to wait a long time even if he does end up popping to become a player. So I would expect Mooney to slip a little bit more than this, but to see him still in the top 80, I respect it quite a bit. Now, I did also want to give a note here to one of the honorable mentions in it, Charlie Serrato, another player we talked about a ton on the channel. As you guys saw on my rankings, was an early second rounder. I absolutely adore him as a double overager. I don't usually like overagers, but this draft, of course, has proven to be an exception. Serrato is somebody that had a brilliant year for Penn State in the NCAA. I think absolutely is deserving of a top 2 round pick. So to see him as an honorable mention, I think is good. I don't think he's going to get selected in the first 2 rounds whatsoever, but I could pretty easily see him as a later third round pick, which I think is pretty fair value. I mean, I get it. He's a double overager. You want guys that are a little bit younger, but at the same time, I just go for the best player available. And Charlie Serrato, especially in the third round, would be immense value. But those are my final thoughts on Bob McKenzie's final NHL mock draft. A lot to sink our teeth into today, and a ton of fun to go through a ton of these names. Thank you guys so much for joining me. And of course, tomorrow we should be having my final NHL mock draft come out with a lot of the info from this list put onto it. So hopefully you guys look out for that. But of course, if you guys enjoyed today's video, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. Comment down below your thoughts on Bob McKenzie's final rankings. What were the big surprises for you? What stood out to you? And how do you see the draft order shaping out now that we have Bob McKenzie's final list? Let me know your thoughts down below. Of course, should have a video of all the hockey fans you guys know online. Click on this card for all my 2025 draft content right in one playlist. And I will see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic day and goodbye.